Advanced Micro Devices is down roughly 7% after the company reported earnings. I don't believe it has anything to do with the overall earnings results. It's definitely what the market is seeing. We see other big players like Intel down 4%, Nvidia down 5%, even big players like Apple down over 1.5%. On today's episode, what I want to do is, like I mentioned, the company just reported earnings. I did a video previously on their earnings result and more of a top level overview. Today, I want to take a closer look at more of their data center products and more of their AI products, as this is definitely a huge growth opportunity for the company. And we did get a lot of commentary during the earnings call, so we will be looking a lot about a transcript. And at the end, I also want to talk about if I'm willing to buy AMD at these stock prices. Let's take a closer look in today's episode. So, like I mentioned, today we're going to take a closer look at more of their data center and their AI market solutions. And I do believe the best way to go about it is by taking a closer look at the transcript. And right off the bat, at the beginning of the earnings call, we did hear a lot of strong kind of commentary on the AI market. They do mention that AI cluster engagement grew by more than 7 times sequentially as multiple customers initiated or expanded programs supporting future deployments of Instinct MI250 and MI300 hardware and software at scale. And this is very important, right? Because right now we are seeing this huge AI investment happening. We heard from Intel about a week ago that most of the money that's going into the data centers right now are going to AI hardware. So one of the things I was really excited to see was what kind of market environment were we seeing for AMD and their data center accelerating solutions like the MI250 and the MI300. And I do want to say, right, the MI300, for those that are not familiar, this is going to be a huge competitor to NVIDIA's kind of Hopper line GPU product. Unfortunately, this product is not expected to ramp up into the fourth quarter of 2023. So definitely some time ahead, but we definitely see some strong engagement in the customer side. They do mention that although market demand remains mixed, the fourth generation EPYC CPU adoption accelerated in the quarter, with revenue nearly doubling sequentially as cloud providers expand deployments to power their internal infrastructure and public instant offerings. And this is another thing, right? AMD just released their fourth generation EPYC server CPU in fall of 2022. Unfortunately, it's coming through in a nice over inventory market and a bit of a slowdown in the data centers and enterprises to some extent, but they are still seeing strong demand for their fourth generation products, which in my opinion is pretty impressive. They do mention that they have roughly 670 AMD powered cloud instances publicly available, and they expect to grow that number 30% to nearly 900 by the end of the year, driven largely by their new Genoa deployments. They also expanded their Zen 4 server product portfolio in quarter four with the launches of Bergamo and Genoa X. So another thing is this company is constantly releasing new flavors of their fourth generation CPU. We got Bergamo and we got Genoa X coming out in later this quarter in the quarter. So overall, we are seeing strong adoptions, and I do believe that does make good for their data center server CPU, which is a big portion of this company's total revenue. They do mention that right now in enterprise, macroeconomics uncertainty resulted in weaker customer demand year over year. Sales of EPYC processors for enterprise servers grew sequentially as they closed multiple wins with large energy technology, financial services, and healthcare companies. So we do know, right, this data center market was down, did not see that huge growth that it normally sees. And one of the big pictures that we're seeing here is obviously that macroeconomic uncertainty. But on some bright news, they do mention that they expect revenue to grow by double-digit percentage sequentially in the third quarter, led by the expanding fourth generation EPYC CPU ramp. So overall, even though first 2 quarters, and we're going to take a closer look at some charts, weren't the greatest, they do expect maybe a stronger second half. And we're going to see in that second half, they really expect more of a stronger fourth quarter than a third quarter. I do believe the third quarter is also going to be a little bit lackluster like quarter two. Kind of some more informations of their data center market. They are turning a little bit more into the broader networking side. They did mention that the largest cloud providers expanded their adoption of Pensando DPUs in the quarter. We did see last quarter that Microsoft was one of the early adopters of the Pensando DPU, so it's great to see this expansion going on. Obviously, one of the big talks right now is the AI. They do mention that they made strong progress in the second quarter as they met key hardware and software milestones to address the growing customer pool for their data center AI solutions. And this is one of the big things that kind of was a hurdle or one of the biggest assets that NVIDIA has. NVIDIA has a strong hardware, but they also have a strong software ecosystem. In response, right now, AMD is still in early innings. They even mentioned that, hey, there's still a lot of work to be doing, but they are making huge movements in the software side, and they are making strong partnerships in the AI sides to kind of allow here. They mentioned on the software and partnership side, Hugging Face announced plans to optimize thousands of their models for AMD Instinct, Ryzen, EPYC, Radeon Verso, and Aveo platforms. So we're also seeing a lot of these partnerships which are going to help optimize AMD's accelerators to do well with kind of these kind of large language models happening all around the world right now. We also continue to see strong partnerships. They do mention a leading AI software company, Mosaic ML, recently highlighted that their Instinct MI250 accelerators delivers competitive training performance with minimal or no changes to the underlying AI software. So again, one of the biggest things right now that NVIDIA has is this software strength. We're still in early innings, but we are definitely seeing some great results. On the hardware side, they did announce that their new Instinct MI300X GPUs are designed to be the world's most advanced accelerators for generative AI. And kind of talking a little bit more about the MI300, they do mention that customers' interest in their MI300A and MI300X GPUs is very, very high. Engagement with top-tier cloud providers, large enterprises, and numerous leading AI companies significantly expanded in the quarter. And I do want to say this is probably one of the problems for NVIDIA. They have too much demand but not enough supply. So some of these other large enterprises, these other top-tier cloud providers, they can't wait for these lead times. So instead, they're also going to be partnering up with companies like AMD to have another second option. This is not necessarily the worst case, right? We see it with CPUs, right? For example, think about Microsoft or Amazon AWS. Amazon AWS runs instances with Intel CPUs and also instances with AMD CPUs. And I do believe this is going to be the case. AMD's GPU market, though, is very, very small in the data center market, and I do believe this kind of hurdle of not enough supply compared to demand is going to help AMD accelerate in this market a lot faster than previously expected. They do mention that they are providing early system access and sampling both products with their lead AI, high-performance computing, and cloud customers now and remain on track to launch and ramp production in the fourth quarter. And for those that are not familiar, when it comes to these data center products, right, a big data center company is not just going to go out there and buy a huge amount. What ends up happening is they like, hey, look, we want to try out your product. We want to see how it's kind of optimized for our data center solutions. We're going to sample it, right? We're going to either get some early access. We're going to sample the product. Then once we kind of do the verification, once we kind of do all the optimization, then we're going to kind of proceed and do these large orders. So it does take some time for ramping from these customers, and right now we are kind of in the early stages right now where some of those big customers are kind of accessing that system early on and sampling some of their MI300 products. The company did mention one thing I did not enjoy is the data center operating income was only 11% of revenue, was 147 million compared to 472 million a year ago, or 32% a year ago of revenue. One of the biggest reasons for these lower operating income was just the huge amount of research and development investment to support the future growth. Right in the upcoming quarters, we got new generation 4 CPUs. We also have the MI300, and that costs money to kind of implement and ramp up. They do mention that in the upcoming quarters, we are going to start to see kind of that operating income inter data center market continue to go back up. I'm hoping eventually we get to see those 30% values, and I personally believe we will, especially of how the market is going. Before we go into the Q&A session, though, I want to take a closer look at the guidance and more importantly in the data center market. So they do expect revenue for the total company for quarter three to be roughly 5.7 billion, plus or minus 300 million. This is approximately either 2.5% growth year over year. AMD is definitely slowing down a bit right now, and approximately 6.5% sequentially. So it's going to be a very, very neutral quarter. Year over year, they do mention that the data center segment is expected to be flattish, and this is very important. They do mention that sequentially they expect the client and data center segment to each grow by a double-digit percentage. So luckily for us as investors, we already know what last year's quarter was for their data center market. And if the company says it's going to be flattish, it's going to be almost a one-to-one revenue outlook. All right, so in the last quarter, AMD did give us some metrics that they expected the data center business to grow by 50% in the second half of the year versus the first half of the year. And this kind of analyst was kind of saying, hey, is that really the case? And they do mention that, yes, that's still the case, right? They still believe around a 50% growth in the second half versus the first half of 2023. And they do mention that they have numerous reasons to kind of continue with that expectations. They have number of design wins in AI deployments as the CPU that goes with GPUs as well as other accelerators. So they are seeing this huge kind of positive push in their CPU side, and they're obviously seeing that strong interest in their MI250 accelerators, which are currently shipping right now, and they're also seeing a strong pull on the MI300 accelerators that are starting production in the fourth quarter. So now this is where I do believe we can kind of do some easy math to see where the company expects some of these growth. So here, let me just zoom in for you guys so we can kind of look at it a little bit closer. So the data center market revenue is this. So in the first half, quarter one, the company had 1.3 billion. In quarter two, the company had another 1.3 billion. So now they for the first half, data center market was pretty much a $2.6 billion revenue segment. We did hear for the third quarter is going to be flattish year over year. Last year, the company saw roughly $1.6 billion in revenue. So now we already know what to expect in quarter three. So now we need to know what to expect in quarter four. Luckily for us, AMD did tell us that they are expecting roughly a 50% growth compared to the first half. So in the first half, if we saw $2.6 billion in revenue, that means for the second half, we are to expect roughly $3.9 billion in the revenue. Now, kind of doing the reverse math, we do expect quarter four to be roughly a $2.3 billion data center segment for the company. And we can see that is huge growth compared to the first half having two sequential quarters of 1.3 billion and the third quarter roughly being 1.6 billion. So we do see this nice growth in the company for the second half. We are going to see where some of this money comes from, but it is pretty interesting to see that the fourth quarter is expected to see a monster quarter for AMD in their data center market. Kind of talking about future guidance, they did mention that, hey, last quarter they did mention that maybe the company was going to grow data center market roughly a 10% year over year for the full year of 2023 versus the full year of 2024. Overall, AMD kind of backtracked a little bit. They did mention that maybe 10% is not really the case. They are expecting roughly at least a high single digits on a year over year basis. So if we take a closer look at the fiscal year for 2022, AMD saw data center revenue of roughly $6.04 billion, right? So now with this math that we just did, this would give fiscal year of 2023 a revenue of $6.5 billion, right? And that's only going to be a 7.5% year over year growth. Let me kind of see percentage, turn this into percentage and kind of let's just move it in. So it's going to be roughly 7.56. If we take a closer look, right? So the companies, if they're expecting somewhere between high single digits. So I do believe in the revenue side for AMD for their data center market, they're either going to see somewhere between 6.5 to 6.65 billion dollars in revenue for 2023, which is not that crazy growth, but at least we are still seeing some nice momentum for the overall company. Another question came out, and one of the things that's really affecting the semiconductor market, especially for advanced AI chips like the MI300, is advanced packaging, which is the back end of semiconductor manufacturing. And unfortunately, there's not enough in that supply chain to really keep up with the overall demand. So there was an analyst saying, hey, how do you expect this to happen in the fourth quarter? AMD pretty much says that, hey, they have ample supply for an aggressive ramp in the fourth quarter and into 2024. So one thing that we do see is that the MI300 is definitely going to see more of a fourth quarter product and kind of ramp up from there. So in the meantime, it does seem like NVIDIA is going to continue to grab a nice amount of market share in this AI accelerator market, at least in quarter two, in quarter three, and maybe even some in quarter four, before some form of competition comes out from AMD, at least in the MI300 side. Another thing, we also kind of got an expectation of how big AMD's data center GPU side really is. There was an analyst that said, hey, they wanted to kind of clarify, and they were assuming that the GPU accelerators could be about roughly a $500 million business for the year for this company, roughly 7 to 8% of data center sales. And Lisa Su kind of mentioned that, hey, I think that number may be a little bit high in terms of GPU market. So just by understanding this, we can kind of see how small the AMD's GPU side is compared to NVIDIA, but it also opens up that, hey, if we start to see this huge adoption of the MI300, this can become a major player for AMD's data center market. And that's what we expect to see in quarter four and in further 2024 as well. A little more commentary, they do mention as we go into 2024, our expectations is, again, let me go back to the customer's interest on MI300 is very high. So they expect early deployments as we go into the first half of 2024, and then we would expect more volume in the second half of 2024 as those things fully qualify. So even in the early 2024, it's still going to be a small blip of the overall demand that they can really see in the second half of 2024. So I do believe right now for AMD, at least for this AI market, it's going to take some time for it to kind of show fruition, but we are going to start to see small increases, I want to say, in quarter three, another small increase in quarter four, in quarter one as well of 2024, until we really start to maybe see that heavy ramp up in the second half of 2024 when some of these things fully qualify. Now, one of the big wins in the AI market for AMD is the Super Capitan, El Capitan, not Super Capitan, supercomputer El Capitan, which is a huge supercomputer here. And they do expect, they were kind of wondering, hey, how much money is that expected to be for the fourth quarter? That's where a nice amount of CPUs and MI300 GPUs are going to head out in quarter four. Lisa Su just kind of mentioned that, hey, we can't give you a full number. They just assume several hundred millions. So maybe somewhere between 300 or 400 millions is the revenue coming from that customer alone. And unfortunately, that we don't like to see that because that makes kind of a bumpy slide. Maybe that's one of the main reasons that in quarter four for this company's year, we do see a huge bump up in kind of revenue. Now, the real question is going to be, is the demand of their customers in the first half of 2024 gonna match up to that kind of demand that the El Capitan kind of provides in the first in the fourth quarter of 2024 as we start to ramp up the MI300s? The final question is kind of talking about AMD's server CPU side. There was an analyst that's saying, hey, is there a cap you guys can see your products reaching? I think this was kind of a weird question because obviously there should be no cap. In theory, the goal should be almost full market share. But they do mention that originally analysts were projecting that 20% was going to be the cap for AMD and their server CPUs. They do mention that, hey, now they've reached that 30%. So could this go even higher? And overall, the company does mention that, hey, they do believe that if they continue to provide amazing products, their market share can obviously grow. And that makes sense. And they do mention that right now there are multiple customers who have deployed in their data centers and they have more than 50% share there. So obviously we can see that in future, we can obviously see a future where AMD has over 50% of the market share in the data center market. Obviously, all this has to do with continued innovation in their side, but at the moment they're still early on. They just barely passed, I believe, the 30% or getting significantly close to there. And they obviously there's numerous growth opportunities here in both the CPU side and in the GPU side. Now I wanted to take a closer look at the company stock. Right, I mentioned right now sitting at $109, a market cap of 177. Personally, obviously, if you look at current PE ratios, some people are going to come out and say in this comment, PE ratio of nearly $500. Obviously, things look bad because we are in this horrible semiconductor cycle, right? A lot of huge impacts have happened in the company inside of their in their client market, which is their consumer product, and they are spending a little bit more money as they are deploying these new generations. But when things kind of turn back up, we do expect PE ratios to kind of contract a lot. So if you're one of those that are just currently looking at these current PE ratios, then AMD and the semiconductor market might not be a business for you to normally invest in, because you're going to get hit with these cycles and you're probably going to freak out a lot. But if we take a closer look at forward PE ratios, looking at 38, now forward 1 year, so the end of fiscal year of 2024, PE ratios currently at 25.8. I personally believe that's not necessarily the worst case scenario. I also do believe that in the next fiscal year, analysts are under projecting what this company can really grow thanks to their MI300 platform. So I do believe right now the market is underappreciating AMD's future growth. Now, do I believe this company can 2x in like a year? Definitely not, but the market is always crazy, and anything can go. I personally believe that in the long term of things, AMD can outperform both the overall market and can outperform the overall semiconductor market. And for me, that's more than enough. That's what I'm looking. I'm looking for market beaters of the overall market, but also market beaters of the semiconductor market. And I do believe in the long term of things, AMD can do that even at current stock prices. AMD right now is my number 2 position. I wouldn't mind adding on to my position right now if it was a smaller size. But right now, since it's my number 2 position, I think I would rather wait for if I don't know if it will, if it maybe gets to maybe sub $100. But like I mentioned, I still believe at these stock prices, it will continue to outperform the market. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Take care, have a good day, and see you next time.